In 1965, the TE21 would have cost you £3,200. That's roughly double the price of the equivalent Jaguar, so it was a really expensive car. But if you wanted to get into a Rolls Royce in that same year, so that would have been a Silver Shadow, that would have cost you double the price. And yet, this, the Alvis, was made to the same standards and even by the same people making the Rolls Royces. Let's find out a little bit more about that connection, and then we'll decide if this really is worthy of being mentioned in the same breath as the roller. The TE21 was the penultimate Alvis ever made. It's another example of a British product of this time that was just too good to be economically viable to produce. It had independent suspension at the front with coil springs, and then a solid rear axle with leaf springs, which is pretty standard for luxury cars of its time. But what really sets it apart is that it had disc brakes all round and a 5-speed gearbox. The 3-litre straight six first came out in 1950 and was continuously developed up until this point. It had a 7-bearing crank to make sure it was very, very smooth, and it produced 130 horsepower. Where the car did fall a little bit behind the competition is at this stage it was still using a separate chassis and body construction. But this is where Rolls came in. Alvis only ever made the chassis and the running gear. For the bodywork and the interior, they relied on coach builders. The ones that they had been using, which is Mulliners and Tickford, had been just bought by other car manufacturers, which left Alvis in a little bit of a bind. And indeed, for a couple of years, they were struggling to produce cars at all. The company had, for some years, been making armoured cars and also parts for Rolls-Royce's Aero engines. So there was already an established relationship there. And it turned out that Park Ward, that by then belonged to Rolls-Royce, had enough capacity to make the bodies and interiors. So this is how this ended up being made alongside the most special rollers and Bentleys. So the fit, finish and quality are undoubtedly up to exalted standards. But the question is, does it also drive well enough to be mentioned in the same breath as what was then the world's best car maker? Let's find out. Now, this may have been double the cost of the Jaguar, but you can really feel a difference, that everything is put together with absolute precision. Now, there's lots of hide in here and there is wood everywhere. Unfortunately, a couple of panels have gone slightly milky on this car, but it looks otherwise really, really fantastic. And some of the detailing on this is just delectable. At the back of the car, to keep it clean, keep it smooth, there's no number plate lights visible for the number plate because they have sunk them into the rear bumper, so they have cut out the rear bumper and the lights are there. It has a beautiful chrome strip going around the number plate. There's no need to have that there, it just looks right. At the front of the car, there's those little mesh grills with the Alvis triangle. Inside, of course, you have the beautifully stitched and produced leather with the woodwork. But also look at those lower ventilation eyeball vents there. They're just things of beauty. Now bear in mind that Park Ward weren't even making the standard Rolls-Royces at this stage. They were only making the special sort of commissions, like the longer wheelbase cars and the sort of special Bentleys. So they really were being put together by the best ever group of people. Now, this isn't the kind of car that you want to disrespect by really wringing its neck, and it's not part of its character or the character of this engine. So I will be good with it, but let's just see what a sprightly run through the gears feels like. They're quite heavy things as well. It is in no ways fast, it really isn't, but this engine absolutely majors on torque. And I love the way it spins up, sort of between 3,000 and 4,000 RPM. There isn't much point going past 4,000. I haven't bothered today because I can just feel that that's where the engine feels most comfortable at the top end. But what I love about it, it's so smooth, it almost feels like a generator. And, okay, it may not have a huge amount of power, but it is really well spread out, the torque, and whenever you touch that accelerator, it does respond immediately. It may not fling it towards the horizon, but it is still pretty responsive. This was also the first Alvis to come with power steering. It was an option, and luckily this car has it. In most ways, it's a huge improvement. It does make it much easier to drive on normal cars because they're quite porky. They can be difficult to handle, especially at slower speeds. The one downside about this power steering though is it makes it very, very light off center. So when you first start driving the car, until you get used to it, it almost makes it feel a little bit unstable. Overall, it's a very nice driving car. It's extremely comfortable, and that's what it was all about. It wasn't about the performance element. These weren't made to go fast. It's very quiet, you can hardly hear the engine. With that fifth gear at about 50 miles an hour, it's a serene place to be. The only thing you can hear is a little bit of wind noise, which is common with cars of this era. The ride though is really, really good. And it's definitely more agile than the equivalent, Bentley or Rolls-Royce would be. Still not sporting, of course, but there is a little bit less inertia to try and juggle with on the road. The driving position is very, very good. You're not contorted in any way. You could do long distances in this. The gears are easy to navigate. It's a 5-speed box. You have the really dainty, tiny little gear shift at the top here, which is a joy to use. And it's very easy to find the gears as well. There's no particular skill required, so it's relaxing to drive. I think the pre-war cars were a little bit more sporty in nature, but by this stage, Alvis was building vehicles which were for the more discerning driver, someone who appreciated unflashy quality. So treat it with respect, and it's smooth, quiet and comfortable, which is exactly what it was designed to do. So where did it all go wrong? Well, by the time that the TE came out, Alvis was a little bit in trouble. This was still a competitive car, but it was based on a chassis which was by then already 15 years old, and a body design, which incidentally goes back to the coach builder Grauber in Switzerland. So that was already 10 years old as well, with the odd tweak like the stacked headlights that came in with this one. Problem is they didn't really have enough in reserve to be able to develop an all-new model, and the construction method involved with the Alvis, where they only really made the transmission, the engine and the chassis and then outsourced the rest, wasn't economically viable. They weren't making enough money per car to build up that war chest to develop new models. So the inevitable thought was that they needed an alliance in order to survive. Somehow or other, that alliance turned into them being bought out by Rover in 1965. And initially, Rover did have plans to continue with the Alvis name to make some new cars. But all that happened is that in '66, the last version of this came out, the TF, which was really fairly unchanged. It had a really good upgrade to the engine, so it went from 130 to 150 horsepower, but apart from that, it was pretty much the same car. But anyway, that came out. And then, by 1968, when Rover itself became part of British Leyland, the Alvis name was quietly pensioned off. And that could be the end of the story, but it isn't quite, because when that happened, all the drawings, the rights of these cars, the previous cars, and the parts that remained were transferred to a private company called Red Triangle. Now, in the intervening years, Red Triangle have been keeping the existing cars afloat, so there's actually a very large number of these that have survived. But more importantly, in 2010, they started making a series of continuation cars. So they started remaking these cars on commission. Maybe it's not quite as obscure as Bristol, but Alvis is still not the best known car maker out there. Not if you consider what these vehicles actually represent. One of the upsides of that is that I think that these really are undervalued compared to what else is on the market. So you could buy a TE21 like this one for about £30,000. And I think that if you add up what you are getting for that, like all the details, the high quality and fit and finish, then you're really getting a bargain. They are fantastic cars for the money. I mean, it's almost unfair to compare it to a Rolls Royce because they're very different cars. I think in terms of fit and finish, the little, the items that you're using on here, I think it is on par, but it does drive quite differently. Now, if you want to bring me your car for a review, I film in the Cotswolds. So if you want to try and arrange that, get in touch. The best way is to send me an email. Thank you so much to Steve for bringing this down. And thank you to all of you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video today.